welcome to the Domain Name Wire podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Alleman, and this is episode number 553. Blockchain-based naming systems continue to adapt, and one of the longest-running ones is Ethereum Name Service, or ENS. You're probably familiar with it from the .eth extension. On today's show, I check in with ENS Labs Head of Growth, James Beck, to understand the latest with ENS. We talk about the organization's recent .locker delegation, how blockchain-based naming systems are adopting DNS, and how the group views the next round of new top-level domain expansion. Stay tuned for that conversation in just a few minutes. First, a word from our sponsor. Our sponsor this week is Sav.com and its domain name auctions. Sav auctions are a great way to liquidate your domain names. I've sold a few. It was quick and easy. There's also a great transfer process. In fact, if your domains are already at Sav, they transfer automatically when they sell. Best of all, sellers pay just a 4% commission on their domain sales. Start selling your domains in Sav auctions. Go to sav.com/DNW/sell. That's sav.com/DNW/sell. Let's run through some news in the domain business from the past week before we chat with James. First, domain and branding platform Atom is facing a lawsuit in the wake of its launch of a new trademark tracking platform at trademark.io. The company launched the service with the brand trademark.io, and that caught the ire of competitor Trademarkia because when you span a dot, it's just one letter off. Atom later changed the name to Trademark by Atom. Trademarkia's lawsuit makes a couple of claims that I don't think are true. For example, it alleges that Atom previously bought the domain trademarkia.io. Well, I can't find the historical Whois record it's referring to. It said it pointed to Atom's name servers, and of course that could mean just someone pointed it there to try to sell the domain name. It also alleges that Atom bought trademark.ai, but I think HubSpot co-founder Dharmesh Shah was the actual buyer of that name. An IP lawyer who commented on Domain Name Wire said that the founder of Trademarkia is litigious. In other news, two firms in the corporate domain space are joining forces. Laude has acquired Fairwinds Partners. In a 2012 round of new top-level domain name applications, the two combined for over 250 .brand domain applications. Laude is now led by Ben Crawford, who is the CEO of what is now Team Internet Group, as it expanded by acquisition. The company is owned by a private equity firm. Last week, I posted a story about how GoDaddy needed to fix its domain search. My story was based on some ex-posts by domain investor Nicole Songvi, who pointed out that the search was suggesting domains that were registered long ago, and apparently this has been a problem for some time. As an example, if you typed in candy.com, it would suggest candy.io and candy.tv, which are obviously taken. One ex-user pointed out if you typed in megaverse.com, it suggested metaverse.com, which again is obviously taken. A couple days later, GoDaddy fixed the issue. There's more news at Domain Name Wire, including a couple of interesting UDRP cases, a tutorial on using Dynadot's pay links, and details on how Google is making it harder for site owners to track rankings. Go check that out at domainnamewire.com. But now, let's chat with James Beck. My guest this week is James Beck. He is the head of growth at ENS Labs. James, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So, James, I'm familiar, and many of my listeners are familiar with the Ethereum Name Service. They might have some .eth names, that sort of thing. But tell me how ENS Labs fits into this whole ecosystem.
Yeah, so ENS Labs is a nonprofit. We're about 30 people, but our core remit is developing the protocol that underpins ENS as a system for naming blockchain addresses. So there's really the ENS DAO. They have control over wallets, the protocol, any protocol updates. And so it's decentralized in the sense that several actors have to sign a wallet to make big changes to the protocol. But it's also, like any governance forum, a chance for different community members, anyone who really has an ENS token, a .eth domain, or an interest in the protocol, to create a discussion topic, to join a meeting. There's meetings every week. So in that way, it's almost like a microcosm of something like an ICANN, although using 2025 internet technologies and even newer experimental governance forms.
So does the DAO then in some ways control what ENS Labs does?
Not essential, more like the DAO is ultimately holding all the revenue from sales of .eth domains go to a DAO treasury. So ENS Labs actually is a recipient of an annual grant that the DAO gives. ENS Labs, though, is also contains, the founder of ENS, Nick Johnson, and we're the ones that are building ENS v2, which are like new smart contracts, a new registry, and also a new layer 2 blockchain. So, there are a lot of what we call service providers that provide essential, gateways and resolvers that aren't ENS Labs, but ENS Labs is probably the main engineers behind the protocol. My role at ENS Labs is to promote the growth of .eth as a domain and understanding of ENS. It's sort of a job that extends beyond just ENS Labs specifically, but rather the entire domain space in Web3.
So it is interesting. Yeah. If I think about, I'm just trying to call a parallel here. In some ways it is kind of like ICANN. Some people cringe when they hear ICANN, right? So, but also a startup at the same time, kind of mentality. So let's talk about, .eth has been around for a while. Ethereum Name Service. When was Ethereum Name Service kicked off?
So we technically just passed our 8th year in operation. Ethereum's been around 10 years. ENS was a really early project that actually, was born out of the Ethereum Foundation. Nick Johnson early on recognized that things like 24-character hexadecimal addresses reminded him maybe even a little bit of the unwieldiness of an IP address. And you need a human-readable alternative that does forward and reverse resolution. So originally, ENS was actually sort of like spawned within the foundation making Ethereum and then became its own project through the launch of a token, which created the DAO and allowed, thousands of people that now have the token to be voting on governance around the future of the protocol.
I want to understand how ENS is used today, because I think that when it started, you could only use it with a .eth name, that only worked on certain browsers, that sort of thing. It was commonly used in wallets. Then, I don't know how many, a year or two ago, it was kind of extended out to more, there was .xyz and then these other top level domains. Do most people today that quote unquote use Ethereum Name Service, whether that's receiving, doing a transaction with an address, that sort of thing, are they using .eth or are they using a second level, top level domain and .com or something like that?
Most people who are comfortable enough using browser wallets or even mobile wallets are actually probably just moving money from an exchange, then using it. If they're using apps, they're likely using ENS or a .eth name to keep track of their wallets. But you do raise an interesting point. So when we often talk about, okay, if you're interested in getting a .eth domain, unfortunately, that's not the first thing you have to do. You have to know enough about crypto to be able to download a browser extension like MetaMask. And I used to work at MetaMask and I understand the challenge of, if you're in Web3, you need to understand this new primitive around, a user-controlled account that only you have the keys to, and you essentially grant permissions for other apps to do X, Y, and Z, whether that's transfer money, sign a message to say, I myself am the one that's signing this constitution, for example. So really, we think of ENS as the second step. You get a wallet. Okay, so now you have your first address that is created by the wallet or the exchange. Next step, name that address. And we've worked with, how it's kind of evolved is it's gone from basically an open registrar format, which still exists. You can go to ENS, app.ens.domains and buy any .eth name that isn't already taken. But now a lot of wallets realize actually the user experience of naming an address and having a human readable name is so important that they're going to embed this as part of the app flow. So to give an example, like Base, Uniswap wallet, when you create a wallet and immediately upon creation of a wallet, they'll suggest, hey, you should name it. And in doing so, they're actually doing subdomains off of the parent address where they've already had uni.eth or base.eth. And it allows them more flexibility. They can launch it on a different blockchain. They could maybe not put it on a blockchain. Uni.eth, for example, is stored off-chain in a database. They can add permissions, like maybe you're allowed to add as many subnames as you or subdomains as you want to this name. Some companies decided, actually, we're only going to give you a subdomain user profile if you prove you're a human. So you have to go through these proof of humanity steps where you submit a passport photo, for example. So really, it's a lot of like functionality built on the ENS protocol. And then the last thing I'll say before I just like blabber on too much, we're also really excited and interested in seeing the ways in which stablecoins have been adopted. It's becoming more than just an idea. It's used throughout the world for cross-border payments. People are, in Argentina are using stablecoins as much as they are traditional fintech and neobank apps. And where we see actual adoption of ENS is within these apps. So right now, today, you're an American, I'm an American, we use PayPal and Venmo as like a common fintech app if you're just sending someone money. Both of those apps, if you're sending crypto, use ENS. So you can use your ENS name, your .eth name in PayPal or Venmo app. And what's cool about ENS is you can actually add all these different coin types. So you can have Bitcoin, Solana, Ethereum. There's like hundreds of coin types. And you could go in the PayPal app, send someone Bitcoin in Nepal, and send it via their .eth name. So we're seeing that adoption of integrations in traditional fintech apps is actually a big area of growth for us.
So we've talked a lot about wallet addresses, and it makes conceptual sense to me, getting back to that whole idea, like domain names came about because IP addresses are hard to remember. These wallet addresses are really difficult. So why not create some moniker that's easy to remember for each of those? Early on, though, it seemed like people were also talking about this as, you can use them for a website, that sort of thing. Has that ever really come to fruition?
Yeah, I'm really excited about the idea. I mean, even just like simply saying, hey, if you're a business and you're in a country that doesn't have a banking relationship with another country, and, let's say you're in Nigeria and there isn't a really strong banking relationship with Sri Lanka. Oftentimes, if someone has a product they want to sell and it involves cross-border transactions, they're using correspondent banking networks. By the time the money gets from point A to B, there's been 20% taken off from all the conversions, the cuts, converting into USD. And so my dream is like, okay, well, if you're a business, you create a website, your domain itself becomes the wallet. If someone wants to pay you, they send stablecoins to that address. It's like mybusiness.com. In practice, we actually saw some initial interest after GoDaddy actually added a feature allowing you to do DNS-sec imports. ENS is now, there's like really kind of two ways to import a domain, and we're actually working with other partners to make it even easier. But the idea that maybe this is blasphemy, but I kind of feel like in some ways, the usage of domains among young people has declined significantly since the advent of social media and centralized social media accounts. Like, people very quickly create an Instagram page for their small business before they maybe even create their own domain that they manage.
That's fair. Yeah.
ENS kind of plays this interesting role where your .eth is both a financial tool, it points to a wallet, but you can also associate all your social media accounts. It kind of acts like a link tree to your digital presence. And we do think, though, that domains have a role to play, and importing domains is really important. And there's a lot of great companies that are much more focused on this. I don't know if you're familiar with like D3, but they're in this whole new burgeoning industry called DomainFi, where they want to basically make it easy for registries and registrars to allow their customers who have domains to immediately turn those domains into a blockchain token. Their arguments are that the secondary markets for domains there's a lot of liquidity left on the table. It's not that easy. Crypto NFT markets do billions of dollars in volume a month. Why not allow the domain industry to sort of access this capital, but also do interesting things? Like, what if you could get a loan out based on a domain you own? As soon as something becomes financialized or a domain becomes financialized, it allows all these other things. What if like a group of 400 people could co-own a very expensive domain, or you could allow business owners to co-own a domain?
I guess so. Kind of getting back to the website, if you have a website and you want people to actually come to it, starting on a .eth is probably not the smart move because they have to have a special browsers, special plugins, that sort of thing. So I think of that more as kind of the financial side, the wallet, the sending payments. Now, I could go register.com though, connect it, and this is what the GoDaddy integration does, I believe, connect that to a wallet address and then say, hey, send me money at domainnamewire.com.
Right.
Something like that.
And we have seen, there's tens of thousands of people that have done that. Many people in the crypto industry, of course, that maybe had .com or a .xyz that they prefer as their central identity. And most wallets support that. You can use Coinbase and send money to someone's .com, and it resolves as an Ethereum address or another blockchain address.
Okay, got it. Recently, you announced that there was this .locker delegation, right? So .locker, Orange Domains, they've been pretty, well, it's a partnership between Two Cows and a couple other companies, and they launched .locker, and you recently said it was kind of delegated to them through ENS, or you can explain what that means, but then I also want to understand how this is different from me just using my .com with, and connecting it to Ethereum Name Service.
That's a good question. And for the technical audience that listens to your podcast, it is probably interesting. So the way I described a DNS import does involve a few more steps. And, essentially it's a bit unwieldy, or it requires, the individual or the user to sort of set up their domain to work as such in Ethereum context. .locker, and there's actually a couple other examples. .box is an example. .art is an example. What they've done is they've kind of simplified it such that it skips the steps needed. So when you buy a .locker domain, literally from the start, it works as an ENS address on all of the associated networks that work with Ethereum. And that's because they're now a registrar that is basically able to sell names under that TLD that is already integrated with ENS. So we think of it as like, that's another step. If .com wanted to do this and basically allow customers to just toggle a button on or off that when you purchase a .com, it is immediately an ENS address, that's something we also would do. It makes it easier than the sort of GoDaddy implementation where you're importing it on your own.
Okay. And so what's involved for registries? A lot of people listening here run a registry. What's involved if they want to do something similar?
Yeah, I mean, what's also cool about the .locker example is even though .locker, as far as other GTLDs go, is pretty small and niche, it provides kind of a blueprint for others to do so. We have a whole integrations engineering team. I would say the best thing to do would be reach out to me or someone at ENS and we can talk about it. But it's as far as steps go, because we are a DAO, it does involve putting up a governance proposal, letting the community read and digest it and understand it, and then ultimately vote on it, which then allows for the technical steps to happen at the root level.
Help me understand, though, when you merge kind of a top-level domain on the DNS like this with Ethereum Name Service, do you ever get kind of this mismatch between who owns the domain, right? Like, let's say it transfers, that sort of thing, and a wallet address. How is that handled in Ethereum Name Service, especially in the case where it's been kind of delegated, if you will?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, an ongoing challenge, and something that's still debated. The question is like, okay, if there's this .eth registry and it's separate from a DNS registry of ownership, and if someone lost ownership of their DNS domain, how do they still have it point to an ENS? I think it's sort of like there's no need for duplicating the registries, but rather if the owner doesn't own the .eth address and the person still owns, and you still own the domain, if someone were to try to send money to that or domain, it would just it wouldn't work because there's no address that it resolves to. And so it's almost more like a broken link where if someone were to lose, or even lose access to their address or lose access to their ENS name or their .eth name, you'd end up in a situation where it's just sort of like a broken link. I hope that helps you understand.
It does. I mean, and I think it's different in what you have than in some other blockchain naming systems as well. And then, of course, there are the name collisions that those face as well, where, one has a .crypto, another one has a .crypto, and that sort of thing. Yeah.
So you bring up an interesting point, and something that even from the start of ENS, there was this awareness that we're kind of entering this uncharted territory. .eth is technically a reserved 3-letter CCTLD for the country of Ethiopia. So, there's never been cases where countries actually use their 3-letter country code top-level domains, but .eth is technically Ethiopia's. So if anyone's listening to this and is going to the ICANN conference in Dublin and knows the GAC representative of Ethiopia, please let me know. We'd love to talk to them. That said, in the constitution of ENS itself, there's always been real emphasis on working within the existing ICANN order and DNS namespace. So we are actually quite vocally opposed to companies that are creating a very collision-filled namespace, multiple companies issuing .crypto or .wallet. And, we've made our opinions known on companies that do that because, one, this is new technology, and I think people get a bit cautious when it sounds like it's meant to change this existing rules-based order that works so well and that everyone relies on the internet. So we've been very, cautious. Like, we don't, if a company is like, oh, can you issue us, a brand new GTLD? We won't do that. And partly out of respect for how DNS works and ICANN, but also for the name collision issues. Our general counsel, someone by the name of Alex Urbellis, he's actually quite active in some of the rules committees with ICANN and has been focused on this name collision issue and is, speaking on panels around this issue.
Yeah, in fact, he submitted a comment to ICANN about the applicant guidebook where it is today.
Yep.
And I think it was kind of interesting because he noted that some of these companies that have started alt-root domains, as I would call them, they're going to apply for the same domain as a top-level domain. And how do you handle that? I mean, on the one hand, you don't want to give a leg up to any of these companies because then that would give them an incentive to launch all these alt-roots. At the same time, nobody wants collisions, right? So, I mean, how do you see this playing out? I mean, obviously, a lot of companies are going to apply for .crypto, and there are various versions of .crypto wallets out there. I mean, do you think, to the extent that the .crypto blockchain names are being used for wallets, do you think this is going to create a lot of issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, on the one hand, the actual new GTLD round in 2026 is potentially going to be massive if there is a lot of competition for these .crypto, .wallet. Those are potentially very valuable new GTLDs in the global namespace. And so, yeah, I imagine there's going to be some legal fights and it'll get expensive for companies involved. As it comes to the companies that have done this, I think ultimately it's been a real breach of user trust because there's already been instances where they are removing and offering credits to these alternate strings that haven't been approved. And so it kind of like affects the whole industry, especially like a crypto industry that's still fledgling. And we're trying to get the acceptance and trust of ICANN and various regulators in other countries too, which is, I think, one of the reasons why Alex is sort of playing a role in really trying to figure out this name collision issue and make sure that we're working with the existing ICANN space. Now, that said, the new application process is also an exciting opportunity for ENS. It provides potentially brand new GTLD endings that could be integrated right away with ENS. And so we see a lot of potential in new endings working automatically within blockchain-based contexts.
So, you kind of alluded to, if you could, you would probably apply for the DAO would vote to apply for .eth. But as you mentioned, it's currently reserved, which on one hand is nice because no one else can go for it at the same time. But it sounds like Ethereum Name Service won't go for any new extensions. It's just more excited to work with companies that do to integrate it into ENS. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I won't I'm trying not to telegraph our plays, but yeah, some companies are like talking about the ones they're going to apply for. We're definitely like, looking and watching the space closely.
Okay, so it's possible that, I'm trying to think how that would work through a DAO though, right? Because then it becomes public, right, before you do it, right?
Therein lies the challenge.
Right, very interesting. I guess you do a proposal to apply for one unnamed top-level domain that we really think is good, and
then behind closed doors, people try to figure out what that is.
Yeah,
or something.
For sure. So, do you think it's kind of interesting to me that all these, I'll just name names, Handshake, Unstoppable Domains, some of the, Free Name, I guess, some of these companies that started as like we're an alternative to real domains and we're going to be better. This is a better use. They're kind of shifting to, okay, we're going to apply for these ICANN top level domains.
ICANN accreditation.
Yeah. And in real top level domains. Why do you think that's happening?
I think probably people saw the initial demand of ENS and were really blown away. And, if you think about it now, there's like 1.6 million active .eth domains, which if you exclude country code top-level domains, that puts us in the top 10 of total domains. And, the DAO itself has made $120 million on selling these domains. So I think there were a lot of people that saw, okay, let's just say, like, take what ENS did for .eth and apply it to every other blockchain. And there's, greenfield opportunity to do the same playbook for every other blockchain. But it's not so simple, partly because I think, if you don't have real principled understandings of what you're trying to do and not create name collisions and really play by the rules, you end up burning out people or coming into legal issues. And I think it is kind of fascinating that they're kind of coming around to maybe becoming ICANN accredited registrars and playing by the rules. But I also think, though, that, back to my earlier statement, there's several billion social profiles and there's only a few 100 million domains. And so if you do think about kind of where the internet and internet culture and business culture is going, we are kind of entering more of a profile-led public persona on the internet. I don't really see the desire for a different type of digital identity to keep taking root. And, do I think .eth is the ultimate digital identity for everyone? Maybe, because, not just because I work and have been .eth holder and because of how extensible it is and allows other things to be attached to it. But I do see a lot of plays where increasingly as AI and as it becomes harder to tell who is real, who is not, who is verified, how do we trust the person we're talking to on the internet, more companies and more ideas are going to be about proving authenticity. And I think domains are a great example where, beyond the hosting of a domain, the authenticity of a domain is something that may require more newer ideas, for example, and domain spoofing, for example. I just think that you can't really put the genie back in the bottle when it comes to this idea of a sort of self-sovereign identity that I can only access with the private key. It's a real foundational privacy thing.
And so this gets back to the digital identity aspect of these alternative names, or these Web3 names, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, I think one interesting topic is there's always been this concept of why zero knowledge proofs are exciting. And I remember even back in 2018, 2017.
Sorry, I'm not familiar with that term, if you could.
Okay. So I'll try to define it, but it's essentially a math problem that has been around since the 80s, and only applied mathematicians around the world really cared about it. But it was essentially, how do you have two systems say, I can with pretty good certainty know what is revealed without knowing the source or the entirety of what is revealed? And so a really good example is let's say you're 22 years old and you go to a bar and the bouncer says, bar's 21 or older, show me your ID. As soon as you pass over the ID, they have access to your address, your full name, so they know where you live, your full name, your birthday. So they actually don't need to know your birthday. They just need to know you're 21. And that doesn't seem that pernicious when it's in real life because it's just such a common thing. But when this happens on the internet, and when you're, for example, opening a brokerage account and you submit a passport photo, those get stored in databases and leaked all the time. Everyone's personal information is just spread out all over the internet, and they get leaked and hacked. A zero knowledge proof posits, what if the only thing you needed to reveal was are you over 21? Yes or no? And where that gets interesting around digital identity is, let's say a system doesn't want a North Korean hacker using a decentralized finance protocol. Instead of requiring every single user of that protocol to submit passport information that could eventually get leaked or hacked, you could essentially have someone attest to with their identity, I am a US citizen, I am not North Korean, without revealing anything else about them. And so it's a really interesting way that, we're working with protocols, for example, that are already beyond pilot stage. They're being used in Argentina, they're being used in Europe, that are really thinking a lot about all the digital identity parts that are leaked on the internet and how you actually kind of rein it back in and provide more security guarantees and privacy for individuals. Because, yeah, unfortunately, all of our information, that's why we get all these robocalls every day. It's because all your numbers are leaked.
And so how do Web3 names, how does like .eth help in that process?
Well, I think of .eth as just another attestation of a person behind a wallet. And so one of the first things you can do with a wallet is sign a signature to say, I'm in control of this wallet. Where that's useful is I think of it as like a cryptographic consent manager. That's a term that the founder of MetaMask used to use a lot. It's essentially a way of saying, it's like a security guarantee to say, only I am responsible for this. And so in essence, then the next step is naming that. Now, just because you have a .eth name doesn't mean you're actually sharing your public identity, because in a lot of senses, no one wants to share their public finances. Like you can go on my .eth and see what coins I have or my last transactions using that .eth. But where it gets interesting is when other decentralized identity protocols that are non-crypto even, there's W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium. They have DID standards for all sorts of digital identities that are crypto or not. And I think being able to then create, so you can imagine an ENS name that has an attestation that says, I'm a real person. I'm not a bot. And we're okay with bots controlling wallets. That happens all the time. But maybe if you're wanting to prove I'm a real person, you may also get an attestation from Coinbase that says, I went through a KYC check on the exchange and I'm an accredited investor and I'm allowed to invest $250,000 in this financial application. All of those can sort of start being attached to your identity. And I think that's where it gets interesting and also allows for more regulation without complete breach of privacy.
All right, James, if anyone wants to contact you to learn more about working with ENS Labs, et cetera, how should they reach out to you?
You can email me at james@ens.domains, or you can go to app.ens.domains, search jamesbeck.eth, and you can find my Telegram, my Twitter, and so on.
All right. Well, James, thanks so much for coming on the show today and talking to us about what's the latest with ENS.
Thanks so much for having me, Andrew.
That's a wrap on this week's Domain Name Wire podcast. You can listen to all previous episodes at dnw.com/podcast or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for listening.